Orla, agus ara banan makesh le áward atá garda de chrí sin cuasaí Ilanda. Sa cóhic sin agus mar is óldéid táid ag fannach leis na cíanta le bPolasaí cuimseach don na Hilan log chósta na tíre. Faoi dhearra híráil tá an chosalucht ar an scéal go mbeidh an policy sin críochnithe raibh na bliana dar leis an ara Humphreys a rénos agus baisúil dhéar á cuineáil agam go cholínú sibh an gealún sin. Bhí próisis córlócáin mar cuid lárnach den Ferbert Policy sin agus chuir ionadia na son muintir na nilán in núil de efficí na rinne I measc gnéithe eile go raibh gá pránach athrú a dhéanamh maidir leis an mealach atá bartaithe in eisteachta a chur ar fáil don na Hileáin faoin scéim líder. Agus go háirid go dúirí achantas don na Hileáin mar réagún an héin. Éileh a líon le réasún ó híomh gála acuine agus is é an réiteach is cílmhara dar le muintir na Nileáin agus inthiam lo is iad sin na sanólia sa cóhéic seo. Farír níl fáilte acu go dtí seo ach an chlús mhabhar. Tá mbeidh impi ort agus ar an rialtas go néistóidh sibh leis le muintir na Nileáin agus na honnadia a choranúil go soléir an tarrú na heithríe atá ag tastal. Go háirid má tá sibh I náiríre faoi Polasaí cuimseach inmharanna don na Hileáine a Urbert a Ailsiú agus a Aimú, bunaithe bhíonanta agus éileh muintir na Nileáin. Minister, in a week where you happily launched Sustainable Development Goals, and it's going to be an annual event, a weekly event, which I welcome. This is a very specific question in relation to the policy that's been developed for the islands, and finally, after a very long time, it looks like we're going to get it before Christmas. As part of the consultation process in developing that report, the representatives of all of the islands asked for a number of things, very specifically that the funding model under the LEADER programme be changed, and that the islands altogether fud na tíre, that they would be recognised as one region and that the funding would go to them as one sub-region. Despite my best efforts, the best efforts of my colleague Eamon O'Keefe in Galway and other TDs, there is little hope of a change so far if we judge from the answers that we've got. Now, in a week where we're talking about sustainable goals, tá deis agat inis, bartaí dhéanamh de bhríthar, and to do something practical to ensure that there's sustainable living on the islands.
Can Corla agus Deputy Connolly, tá brón nar níl beagán géag gan ní ra mé ábal tá gach oscail hiiscintach. I understand your question correctly looks at the issue of the future of our islands and how we as a government and as a people can make sure that they thrive. And can I give a couple of reflections on that? I had the pleasure of meeting the Códáil na Nileáin last year, and I'm very familiar with a lot of the islands. I spent a lot of time on a whole variety of islands, so I found that a very rewarding experience. I do believe that it's absolutely appropriate for the islands to get special attention and treatment, because I believe there's huge benefits to that in so many different ways. They're often a microcosm of wider Irish society. They're a place where we can really test and see how we progress. One of my great heroes, Richard Douthwaite, the great green economist, used Inish Boffin as an example, where he said you can measure what's coming in and coming out. You can measure progress. And the progress and the sad truth in our islands is that there's been a story of decline in population over many decades of the history of this state. I'm glad to say, though, that it seems to me that there are signs that that may be about to turn, and it's something that we should look to encourage and accelerate and facilitate. I saw actually coming out of COVID a number of islands where people have been able now to work remotely, starting to see this was a brilliant place to raise a family, to live and to be able to work, often in different locations at the same time. I believe I would support your proposal and suggestion with regard to the LEADER programme and the islands being treated as a distinct region because they have characteristics that make them different to the rest of the country. I believe, secondly, that there's also really good, interesting examples happening now in education, which is critical. That the likes of Ceisteanna, in my sense, that the secondary school there has provided a real example that we could use on other islands. And in fact, in many ways, if we're to work collectively together, you could have schools which share resources and share distance learning. And I think that's critical in terms of getting young people raised and educated. I think there's also in that one of the benefits from islands, and what I see from islands, is they tend to have people who are incredibly skilled in a variety of different ways. That you have to be adaptable, you have to be able to turn your hand to different tasks. And actually, we could do with teaching the rest of the country some of what people call in the island skills. That's something that we could actually go to the islands as something that we could bring back to the rest of the country in a way that would be very beneficial. Lastly, in energy, we have to treat islands differently because if in fossil fuels, it's very dangerous and expensive to bring fuels out to an island and back. I was proud in my last term as Minister to double the grants specifically for retrofitting insulation of buildings. We've seen on the likes of Inishmore and the Aran Islands a real success story. Now it needs to go further, but in terms of how community energy projects can work to actually improve the housing, be this example I mentioned earlier on, how we switch away. So my answer to your question is yes. It's our specialties. We have to treat them in a different way. We have to work collectively within the islands to make sure we get the best. Schools, energy systems, transport systems, jobs. And I think the LEADER scheme you suggest could be a path towards that.
Another day I'd enjoy reflecting on the islands, but at this point we're on a policy and the policy has to reflect what the people want. I haven't the time to go into that. So the urgency is to get the policy published and then get it based on legislation. Specifically today, I welcome what you're saying in relation to LEADER. If I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying you agree that the funding for LEADER should be changed to facilitate the demand, not the demand, the request of the islanders that they would be recognised as a sub-region in addition to the other areas and not aligned with each county throughout the country, that there'd be a specific region. That's specifically set out in the representations to us. I clearly hear you saying that you support that, and I welcome that. And I'm asking you now to do something about that, because if you don't take action, the powers that be are going to proceed with the existing scheme, which does not recognise all of the islands as a sub-region or a region on their own. We're past talking about what the islands can teach us. We know that. They're a microcosm of how to do things right. They've shown resilience. What we need to do now is do something for them in terms of policy, legislation, funding, and the most specific way to do that is this week or next week change the funding model.
My understanding the Social Protection Committee visited Bear Island, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? And I'll be honest, I think they also need to advise, they need to recommend, and they need to come forward with regard to this specific policy decision and what the approach is. So let us, my understanding that the Minister and the Department are considering that and looking at that. They should take into account what the Oireachtas Committee said, what obviously the island people are saying, and any further and other evidence that they can present. I mentioned that experience I've had in the islands, not out of trying to divert, but actually trying to use that experience as I see it to try and inform that debate. And as I said, I think we are at a point where we could very much turn the tide in favour of people living on our islands, and that being an example and benefit to our country. I very much support that.